Welcome to this awareness briefing on the new Building Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022. The current building regulations were created in 2012 and are titled the Building Regulations Northern Ireland 2012. Since 2012, the regulations have been amended 3 times. They were amended in 2012 in relation to a procedural matter for the time period for issuing of a contravention notice. They were amended in 2014 in relation to Part F requirements, conservation of fuel and power, and they were amended in 2016 to introduce a new Part M, physical infrastructure for high-speed electronic communication networks. So the new Building Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022 is the 4th amendment to the 2012 Building Regulations. It was made law through a statutory rule on the 28th of February 2022, and the new requirements will apply from the 1st of April 2022. The changes involved are in relation to fire safety requirements and radon requirements. Taking the fire safety changes first, in terms of the regulations, there is an amendment to Part B, Materials and Workmanship of the Building Regulations. Also, as a consequence, there is a change to Part A, Interpretation and General of the Building Regulations. There's also accompanying guidance changes to Technical Booklet B, Materials and Workmanship, and Technical Booklet E, Fire Safety. Just a bit of background behind the changes. Post-Grenfell Tower fire tragedy in June 2017, there has been concern over the use of combustible materials as part of external walls and the contribution they make to external fire spread. This is particularly prevalent in relation to high-rise residential type buildings. To address these concerns, England introduced a new requirement in their building regulations in December 2018. Their new requirement in effect banned the use of combustible materials in external walls and specified attachments of certain higher risk residential buildings they termed relevant buildings. Wales followed suit and replicated the ban in England, coming into effect in January 2020. Scotland have not introduced an outright ban for now through regulation, but have implemented higher standards for cladding and insulation on their buildings through guidance. The Republic of Ireland have made no changes in relation to external fire spread requirements and hold the position currently in line with HERE prior to these changes being made. So this amendment replicates the bans introduced in England and Wales. At the heart of these changes is a new requirement in Part B of the Building Regulations, which will be New Regulation 23.2. It reads, subject to paragraph 3, building work shall be carried out so that materials which become part of an external wall or specified attachment of a relevant building are of European classification A2S1D0 or Class A1, classified in accordance with BSEN 13501-1 2018. Obviously, there are key terms within this new regulation which have been underlined to highlight their importance. So Regulation 23.2 applies to external walls and specified attachments of relevant buildings only. New definitions are given in Regulation 22 of Part B for external wall and specified attachment. Basically, the external wall incorporates everything from the internal finish outwards. Attachments subject to the new requirement are specific to balconies, solar panels, and sun shading devices. A new definition for relevant building is also given in New Regulation 23.4. It reads, a building with a storey, not including rooftop plant areas, or any storey consisting exclusively of plant rooms at least 18 metres above ground level, and which A, contains one or more dwellings, B, contains an institution, or C, contains a room for residential purposes, excluding any room in a hostel, hotel, or boarding house. Above ground level is also defined in new Regulation 23(4). Some examples of relevant buildings are blocks of flats, hospitals, care homes, nursing homes, and student accommodation. It's important to stress the 18-metre threshold that applies. It is not the height of the building, rather the measure from ground level to the topmost story. The new requirement in 23(2) only applies to buildings over this threshold, and not to those below this height. Within Regulation 23(2), the performance classifications in terms of reaction to fire are given in the European classification system. Class A1 and A2 S1D0 are performance classes achieved through small-scale fire tests and classified in accordance with BSEN 13501-1 2018. These classifications are the highest classifications possible for materials to achieve in terms of combustibility. In essence, combustible materials cannot achieve these classifications and are thus banned from use on relevant buildings. As a prescriptive regulation, it should be noted that 1. Materials tested achieving national classifications are unacceptable for use. 2. For relevant buildings, the option of a BS 8414 test as an alternative route to compliance is unacceptable. And 3. An assessment in lieu of a BS 8414 test is also unacceptable. The only way to comply with Regulation 23(2) is to use materials achieving Class A1 or Class A2 S1D0. New Regulation 23(3) gives a list of components which will be exempt from the new requirement in 23(2). This list is made up of small components whose contribution to external fire spread would be insignificant enough to allow their use, and also for materials and products which do not readily come in a non-combustible form. The list includes door frames and doors, window frames and glass, membranes, and other small items. The new requirement in Regulation 23(2) applies when a relevant building is newly erected, when alteration work to a relevant building takes place, when extension work to a relevant building takes place, or when a relevant building is created as a result of a material change of use. As mentioned earlier, because we want Regulation 23(2) to apply when a relevant building is created as a result of a material change of use, there is a consequential change needed to Part A, Interpretation and General of the Building Regulations. In particular, Regulation 8, Application to Material Change of Use, has been amended. A new table to Regulation 8 has been provided, and the notes to Table 8 have been amended to reflect the application of Regulation 23(2) through Part B for the various cases of material change of use. With the changes to Part B, there is also a change to the accompanying guidance in Technical Booklet B, Materials and Workmanship. A new paragraph 2.14a is inserted to direct the reader to the requirements of Regulation 23 and to Section 5 of Technical Booklet E, Fire Safety, which contains further guidance in relation to the requirements of Regulation 23(2). The changes in Technical Booklet E, Fire Safety, consist of new guidance to new requirement 23(2 in Section 5, which deals with external fire spread requirements. Also in Section 5 of TBE, rearranged clarified guidance is given to existing external fire spread requirements under Regulation 36 of Part E. Also, there is new generic guidance in Section 1 of TBE for carrying out assessments in lieu of tests or desktop studies by another name. The new guidance in Section 5 of TBE to Regulation 23(2) basically reinforces the requirements to the prescriptive regulation. It gives examples of typical buildings that constitute a relevant building. It reiterates that certain components are exempt from the new requirement, and it reiterates the application of the new requirement through a material change of use. The guidance in Section 5 to existing Regulation 36 of Part E for external fire spread requirements on external walls has been amended for clarification purposes. The guidance clarifies that Regulation 36 applies to all buildings irrespective of height. It clarifies that materials and products such as insulation and core materials of composite panels are required to be a minimum of Class A2 S3 D2 in non-relevant buildings with a story over 18 metres in height. Obviously, for relevant buildings, Regulation 23(2) applies, and the higher performance standards for materials and products will apply. Also, there is clarification in regard to surface performance classifications for external walls in a new Table 5.1a. These are given under the European classification system only. These surface requirements are given for all buildings of any height. Post-Grenfell Tower fire, there has been much debate about the use of assessments and the competencies required by those wishing to carry out assessments in lieu of tests. New guidance is provided in Section 1 of TBE to give general advice to those wishing to carry out any type of assessment. The new guidance highlights that assessments should not be a means to avoiding a test, that assessments should be based on relevant test evidence, that assessments should be done in line with the standard for extended application for the test in question. In the absence of a specific extended application, then BSEN 15725 extended application reports on the fire performance of construction products and building elements should be used to base assessment reports on. With regard to who is competent to carry out such tests and assessments, the guidance points to organisations with the necessary expertise, such as notified bodies under the European Construction Products Regulation, or UK-approved bodies under the UK Market Conformity Assessment Bodies. Laboratories accredited by UKAS for the relevant test in question can also be assumed to have the necessary expertise. So in summary, the fire safety changes to this building regulations amendment consist of a new Regulation 23(2) in Part B, Materials and Workmanship of the building regulations. This new regulation applies to relevant buildings only. It sets a minimum performance classification for materials to be used as part of external walls or specified attachments. In effect, it bans the use of combustible materials on relevant buildings. An exemption list has been created for small components which are not subject to the new requirement. In relation to the guidance changes in Technical Booklet E Fire Safety, TBE, there is new guidance in Section 5, External Fire Spread, to new requirement 23(2). There is clarified guidance in Section 5 for external fire spread requirements to existing Regulation 36 of Part E, and there is new guidance in Section 1 of TBE in relation to assessments in lieu of tests. Moving on to the issue of radon and the changes in relation to this amendment to the building regulations. A bit of background first. Radon is a naturally occurring radioactive colourless and odourless gas which is formed by the radioactive decay of small amounts of uranium and radium that occur naturally in rocks and soil. The gas can move through cracks and fissures in the subsoil and out to the atmosphere. Most radon disperses into the air, but some collects in spaces under or within buildings. For residents of dwellings, exposure to high levels of radon for long periods increases the risk of developing certain lung cancers. The areas on radon maps where radon protective measures are necessary are called radon-affected areas. Radon is dealt with in the building regulations through Part C, site preparation and resistance to contaminants and moisture, where a definition for radon-affected area sits. This picture simply illustrates radon emanating from the breakdown of uranium or radium and its potential to enter a building through cracks and windows and joints, etc. As part of this amendment, under Part C, and specifically Regulation 25(3), there is a new definition for radon-affected area. It makes reference to the publication Radon in Northern Ireland Indicative Atlas. The maps contained in this publication are based on the most recent of radon and geological surveys for here. Under these updated maps, it is estimated around 1 in 5 dwellings will fall into a radon-affected area. If your dwelling is identified as being in a radon-affected area, using this new atlas of radon maps, then radon protection measures are needed. Guidance to the requirements of Regulation 26 are given in Technical Booklet C, Site Preparation and Resistance to Contaminants and Moisture. The technical booklet changes now reference the 2015 publication Radon in Northern Ireland Indicative Atlas to identify if you are in a radon-affected area or not. The technical booklet also references BRE-produced publication BR211, Radon Guidance for Protective Measures in New Buildings of 2015. It is this document which should be used to establish the level of protection measures necessary or not if identified as being in a radon-affected area. Radon is measured in becquerels per cubic meter, with the action level being identified as 200 becquerels per cubic meter. So if the probability is 0 to 1% of radon concentration exceeding the action level, then no protection measures are necessary. If the probability falls within one of the 3 categories in Zone 1 of exceeding the action level, then a radon membrane should be installed to limit radon ingress. For higher risk, where the probability of radon concentration exceeding the action level falls into one of the 2 categories in Zone 2, then a radon membrane should be fitted, plus some sort of means to ventilate and extract the radon from gathering under the dwelling. Please remember that radon requirements through Part C in the building regulations do not apply to existing dwellings. The requirement only applies when a dwelling is newly constructed, when alterations or extensions are carried out to an existing dwelling, or when a dwelling is created as a result of a material change of use. All of course dependent if in a radon-affected area or not. To summarise the radon changes then, there is a new definition for radon-affected area in Part C, which references the 2015 publication Radon in Northern Ireland Indicative Atlas. The maps in this publication are to be used to establish if in a radon-affected area or not. The amended guidance in Technical Booklet C refers to BR211 of 2015 for the radon protection measures necessary or not. To summarise in totality then, this amendment to the Building Regulations of 2022 makes changes to Parts A, B and C of the Building Regulations to address fire safety and radon issues. These changes are achieved through the new statutory rule entitled the Building Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022. As a consequence of the regulatory changes, there is technical guidance changes to technical booklets B, C and E. These changes are achieved through the amendments booklet AMD7. This brings to an end this awareness briefing on the Building Regulations 2022 amendment. Copies of the statutory rule and amendments booklet AMD7 are available to download from the Department's website at the address below. Thank you for listening.